I'm going to start the recording, and we'll go ahead and get started. So Tracy and Patrick, I see you're on the site. Are you on the phone call yet? Brad, I think you're the only one who's on the phone call. I'm going to hold on for just a minute. That's
all righty.
We'll wait for a couple of more people. Who just signed in?
Tracy.
Hi, Tracy.
Morning, Tracy.
Hi.
We're just about to get started, and I see Patrick is on the line. He has not yet joined on the phone call, so wait just a little bit. Oh, you know what? Patrick said he was going to be 15 minutes late. He sent me an email, so which I appreciate. So why don't we get started? How's your Friday going, Tracy?
Oh, it's very busy here at the hospital, so it's great.
Okay, good, good. That's a great attitude to have, right? Thank goodness it's Monday.
Volume is our best friend.
Is the way Michael Bloomberg would describe that. You love your work. Okay. Well, it's good to have the weekend too. If you get any weekend, I get some of a weekend. I usually try and take a day off. Anyway, so I'm looking forward to that. So anyway, welcome to this is the fourth lecture. We're going to be talking today a lot about business cases and financial calculations. So we're going to be moving from sort of the warm and fuzzy to the, I don't know what to say, cold and fuzzy. Business cases involve hard numbers, and most people think of numbers as things that are very, very hard and definite things. And I think that one of the things that if you don't already have, it's really good to develop a facility for with numbers and with the analyses that we're going to be doing later, are that numbers are a language that we work with, and if we use them well, we can speak poetry, and if we use them very crassly, we can write ugly graffiti onto walls too with numbers. But behind every number and every equation is a story that's being told, and that's really what that's really the way that we want to approach it. So I have the same approach to business cases and things like that. When we make a business case, yeah, there has to be some structure to it, and it does involve some numbers, and getting right numbers, or getting good numbers, I should say, is often better than getting bad numbers or no numbers. But being flexible and creating a business case that allows you to make good decisions on whether to invest something or whether to not invest, whether to focus on a certain area or whether not to focus on a certain area, that's really the goal of what we're trying to do. And so we'll talk about that today. So that's what we're really going to do. I'd like to spend a good amount of time, or some time, well, let's just walk through the agenda today. So I want to spend a little bit of time to allow for questions and answers that you may have on the last lecture. I want to spend some time talking about cost of poor quality. When I learned all this stuff, cost of poor quality, people talked about that a lot and did an awful lot of work with this. What I have found is that personally, I've found that business cases just based on cost of poor quality notions, cost of poor quality is helpful, but you need to do more than that. And so we're going to be talking about actually putting together business cases. To do that, we'll have to spend just a little bit of time. We're obviously not going to plumb the depths of financial mathematics, but I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the mathematics of interest. And we won't spend a lot of time with the equations and all that, but I want to show you how it all works in Excel. If you're not totally familiar with it, I think this will be very helpful. The idea of how money changes value over time is sorry about that, folks. That was my phone. I've now got it on vibrate. How money changes over time, is something that's particularly valuable for us to know sort of how those work, just in a basic sense. And anyway, in order to do some business cases, we're going to have to spend a little bit of time with understanding how to make an estimate of something. And so we'll spend a little bit of time with that, and we'll round it up very quickly at the end with just an overview of scoping beyond using the input-output tool. What happens if you want to scope your project further, which is always something that should be, I won't say top of mind, but it's got to be in your brain, certainly as a black belt and as a green belt too. It's really helpful if it's in your brain that you're always looking for opportunities to apply the 80-20 rule, right? So the idea that we're never going to fix everything, but if we can get 80% with only doing like 10% of the 10% of the problems, boy, that's a huge win for us. So we'll look for opportunities for that. And at the very end, I just really want to prep you for, you should have noticed that in the assignments that I gave you, in the black belt assignment, the last question or the last exercise is actually to create for your project a Gantt chart. So if you're not familiar with that, I want to spend just a little bit of time kind of walking through that and talk about, you know, kind of what my expectations are. But more of that, it really needs to be valuable for you creating that artifact. So I'll talk just a little bit about project management tools. But I think there's nothing in that section that's going to present any problems for you in terms of reading it through. You'll get it. It's mostly about tools and, yeah, I need to set up a daily huddle, or I need to set up a communication plan. Here's what I ought to think about putting in. So that's what that is. Take a little bit of time to wrap up and call it a day, and hit the links. No, just kidding. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. Hopefully you guys, or maybe one of you or two of you, are going to be able to do that. Sounds like, Tracy, you're not, because it's a busy day. Okay. So that's it. So let's open at least by asking, are there any questions that anybody has that we can answer right up front? Any questions about the last lecture? Any questions about the next homework assignment? I should say that the green belts, I think both of you are assigned to a project, so the exercises in terms of the Gantt charts and the schedules and the SIPOCs are really to review with the black belt the SIPOCs that are created. You can also help them create it if that's valuable. Okay, sorry about that. You guys have the floor. Questions from last lecture?
Nope. I'm good, Mark.
Okay. All right. Sounds like most people are pretty good with that, and so that's good. I want to review just one thing, and that is that whole measurement process, because we went through that very quickly, and I want to show you that there is a tool that's available. I think all of you are signed on the straight line platform, so you all have access to it. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Okay, is there anybody who cannot see my screen? Please speak up. Okay. All right, so you'll see on the left-hand side, whenever you're on the website or on the screen here when you sign in, you'll see on the left-hand side there are there are these icons for three tools. One is Sample Sizer, one is Decision Guru, and one is Measurement Mentor. Sample Sizer and Decision Guru we'll spend some time with later. Measurement Mentor is the least developed of these three, but I just want to show you that if you want to use it, it's helpful to help frame up what do I need to look at in my process, how do I put together a data collection plan. And I just want to kind of walk you through that. If you want to use it, it's free for you to use, and you can always share it with PDFs. So you initiate it by just clicking on it, like so. And you'll see when I click it, there will be another window that wants to come up. there, and there's another window that came up. But I'm going to actually walk through a real example. So I'm going to open this up that says Tom's Capacity Project. Now this was a cleansed example, but you can see that there are a number of different steps, and it starts you off by saying, if you recall, we talked about sort of the steps of getting a measurement getting a measurement plan together, or data collection plan, and you start with saying, well, what are the things that we're trying? Why are we collecting the data, and what sort of data are we collecting? And it just kind of walks you through that whole process, all the way to the sampling plan and putting together a picture for how all these things are related. So it walks you through, and it starts saying, why are you collecting the data, and you can check more than one, and you can add in your own if you want to. And at each stage, there's questions and online help for this. So if you don't know what's going on, you can walk through. Who are the customers? What do the customers care about most with respect to this? So you can see that this is a client. Internally, there's a customer who's sales and analysis and so forth, his supervisor. External customers are, they care about the capacity improvement and the purity of their dog food. This happens to be for Purina, was the client. And internally, they care about what can they sell to Purina, and so forth. At the bottom, basically, it's prompting you for what types of measurements could be associated with these customer needs. So for capacity improvement or purity of dog food, there's quality, there's always time. They're adding in some other financial measures and other measures, so turnaround time in particular. They might care about defects. So for Sue, for your project, which is the Net Promoter Score project, you could literally add in NPS here, or you could click on retention and loyalty, competitive measures, whatever, satisfaction. We're going to hit the continue. And as you continue, it asks you, you can see it summarizes what you did on the previous page in this yellow box. And it asks you which measurements are the most important, and you can select from whatever things you put on. So I'm going to go back and actually add one in. I'll add in Net Promoter Score instead of turnaround time. And now you'll see NPS falls in here. There it is right there. And the second most is quality and whatever. You'll see some stuff at the bottom. That's because I'm an admin. You won't normally see that. Go ahead and continue. And now it has, here are the things that you're measuring. And it'll ask you for definitions. So you can enter in your own definitions here. It'll ask you when you want to, when you enter in the definitions, it'll ask you what type is it, what's the name of this, what your definition is, how often are you going to take this measurement, is it a one-time measurement, is it a weekly measurement that you're going to take, did you test your definition, testing operational definitions, yes, no. And, you can see at a glance all these things that are there. Move forward. Now it'll ask you to identify key drivers. So this is like the left-hand side of the SciPoc, the inputs, and you can enter them in here. Again, I would spend more time, but I think it makes sense. We've already covered the data collection, so this should make sense for you. Now it allows you to write definitions for all those. Now notice it's giving you a picture now of what's related to all these output variables. So for example, raw material is an input to both first pass yield and capacity, whereas the manager or the operator or day of the week is not an input, not considered an input to capacity. Let's see. Oh yeah, I just went forward. I'm going to go back just one again. You'll see that you can enter in all the definitions on these. You can see how much this was. This didn't get to this because it was primarily a setting the baseline measurement. So so most of the definitions don't even exist there. And here's where you put together the sampling plan, and you can say here's what you're going to do for each of the things. I'm going to do a simple random sample for first pass yield, simple arrangement, and for break-even part, I'm just going to use my judgment about that particular measurement. But you can see they're all in there. I can use a sequential. I can use a stratified. And if you forget what they are, you can click on here, and it just kind of gives you an idea of what they are. And you can enter in a general description. This needs work. Yes, it does. And that's about it. I mean, it actually then puts together the plan, and it gives a little summary and then definitions for each of these as you're going down. And you can export it to a PDF or a document, or print it, or save it. And that's basically it. So if you find that this would be helpful, please go ahead and use it. And give me all the feedback that you have on it, good, bad, ugly. We appreciate it. If you even just find it helpful to say, okay, yeah, there's these steps, I want to think them through before I do things, that's great. The advantage of using this is that, you know, it makes very obvious what all the definitions are, and puts it all in there. You still have to do all the work to putting it in. It's really just essentially a glorified template. Here I am denigrating my own software, but that's basically what it is. So anyway, if any of you want to use this and you're wondering about it, just give me a call and we can walk through it together. Happy to do that. All right, so I'm going to move on from the review, but I wanted to make sure that that you saw that this was available to you, and that it kind of summarizes the whole data collection process for a number of different things and can capture it. I'm going to close it down. All right. Now let's move on to cost of poor quality. So I'd like you to turn to slide 79 in your week 2 in your binder for week 2. Okay, and all right. All right, so cost of poor quality is, as I said, it's really a focusing tool to help us understand sort of where we may be, where we might focus first, and what sorts of things might be causing quality costs for us. It is supposed to be a financial measure or a financial tool. So let's look at a couple of these. After we finish, we're going to essentially be able to use the cost of poor quality. And here's a couple of different places where it can come in, but it can also come in. Here, where we rescope. It can also be a nice tool that's used, and it can also be used in terms of recommending future improvements or deciding upon which solutions make the most sense. So it can be used in a number of different places in the domain process as you're going through. Okay. Now I want to make sure that we get this part, and that there are essentially, I would say there's two, but there's more than this. I like to think of it, at least in simple cases, there's two places that we essentially think about the value of the project. One is in selling it, okay? So we may have already sold this, and we may be already executing on the project, but we want to capture in, I believe, a very bold way, and we'll have more to say on this in a bit, but we want to capture what is the real value of doing this project. And then when we know what we're actually going to do for a solution, we'll want to do our best to calculate a cost benefit. Now, often at either this point or at the very end in control, we'll also be talking about sort of how this is going to be flowing into budgets and who gets credit for it. And sometimes that's a very different calculation than what is the value of the project. Because, for example, a project could be very, very helpful in creating a climate, or in fact creating additional customers, in growing customer base or creating revenue. At the same time, it may not be something that flows into a particular manager's budget, say for hiring or for acquiring machinery in the next budget cycle. So sometimes, in a situation like that, it may be an expense number that's done on the save that really goes back into that, or so forth. Suffice it to say, though, there's a lot of things that don't directly create revenue that we need to do very, very well in order for sales and marketing to be able to make a good play to the customers that we have and to the customer base that's there, and to really grow the revenue that we want to grow. And that's just one example. But anyway, I wanted to make sure that we understand that we're talking about when we're creating a business case, we're mostly talking about here or before. So when we get to that, I'll make that distinction again. Okay. Now, what is cost of poor quality? Well, it's a tool that essentially does the following. It says that that quality cost can be put into 4 different types of categories, or poor quality cost can be put into 4 categories. There's the cost of getting it wrong, which is really external failures and internal failures. That's one way of thinking about it, the cost of getting it wrong. And just to be simple about this, and we don't need to overcomplicate it, external failures are failures that the customer sees. The customer sees an external failure. An internal failure is a failure that an external customer does not see, but we do. Okay, so we can fix that. We fix it before it gets to the customer. And then there's appraisal or inspection costs and prevention costs, and those are the costs of getting it right, or of checking to see that it's right. So checking to see that we got it right, there's a huge cost to that. And anybody who's in healthcare, either from the provider side or from the insurer side, or from the insurer side, knows that there's an awful lot of money that's put into inspection. And finally, prevention. Things like Lean Six Sigma projects are costs of poor quality. If we never got anything wrong, we wouldn't have any reason to improve it or fix it. That's pie in the sky, obviously, but we may as well put that in. It's going to be part of our business case, is the cost of running the project. Here's probably the best way that I think about it, or the best way that I know to think about it. If we think about a pie, if we think about these costs of a pie, now I guess this is the opposite way that I think about it on Thanksgiving, where I like a big pie. If I'm talking about cost, I'd like a small pie. Maybe I'm on a diet, right? So I'd like a small pie, and that's kind of what's going on from left to right. But also, I want to change around the slices. So if I think about it, for every $1 in prevention, and this is not a mathematical based model, it's just a sort of a spit in the ocean type of model. That means very broad and rough cut. A swag model, maybe that works for you instead of spit in the ocean, which is maybe kind of gross. Didn't think about that. I always used to play that card game when I was growing up. Okay, for every $1, if you spend $1 to prevent something, you spend about $10 to try and inspect it and so forth. So inspection costs for every error, that's about $10. For every, again, it's about $100 for every internal error, and for every customer error or external error, we're talking about $1,000. And you can kind of see that, right? I mean, if you poison a customer, they might have a lawsuit against you, right? If you're McDonald's, or if you send, if you really get it wrong, if you're a car dealership and you sold somebody, if you say you're a used car dealer, you sell somebody a real lemon, they're not going to come back to you, and you've lost 100% of that next sale, maybe for life. So what we want to do is we want to categorize what these things are, and then try and make the key lime, the green slice, as small as possible. And the next smallest should be the external pie. The strawberry slice should be about as, or the cherry should be about as small as that, but not quite. And then you can incur some inspection cost, and then, but you want the bulk of it to be prevention cost. So that's it. I mean, there's no magic to it. It's just sort of listing out. If you have different types of errors, you can categorize them into these different things and say, okay, that gives us an idea of how much, of where we ought to focus first. So given the choice, if you've got equal amounts of, say, external errors and internal errors, you'd rather take care of the external errors first. I have you reading the Aubrey Daniels and saying, we have too much common sense. Well, once you use this tool and have that sort of rational thinking, it makes common sense possible. And so once you look at it that way, I think it is common sense. Here are just some examples of cost of poor quality. Oh, I know, before I move on to this, I wanted to mention, when I was trained in quality, all I heard day 1, day 2, day 3 is you can't inspect in quality, you can't inspect in quality, you can't inspect in quality, so get rid of inspection. Well, I swallowed that hook, line, and sinker until the first place I worked that we had trouble getting something right to the customer. And let me tell you, it would have been so dangerous to get rid of inspection there. We would have lost our shirts. So yes, inspection is a cost. It really is a cost when you have to, in a hospital, ask me for my date of birth every single time. That's a cost. But maybe that's a cost that you're willing to make because of potential fraud that really exists, or because of potential errors that really exist. So use your judgment on that. Okay, let's just talk a little bit about different types of costs. What are some things that can come in here? So if we're talking about, let's talk about the right-hand side, which is external failures. If you're in a manufacturing environment, repair, servicing products in the field, like if you're at a if you're a municipal utility, sending the guy out to repair a furnace, that's a cost. That's an external failure. Warranty costs. So if you have a warranty on software and the software doesn't meet that, you have to replace it. That's external failure. Complaints, returns, liability, loss of goodwill. All of that is external failure. Send a client or send a customer the wrong bill. That's an external failure. Internal failures are things like scrap and downgrading. In manufacturing, that means I can't sell. I damaged the product, and I can still sell it, but I can't sell it for the original price. I'll sell it to I'll sell it to Food Club or Best Yet or something like that, and they'll sell it generically. It's a downgraded product, which is, by the way, why you get those at cut costs. One of the reasons why you do. Rework. So if I get something wrong and I have to rework it, there's a cost to that. Reinspection. If I inspect it and then I have to inspect it again, that's a pretty big cost. Research that's done on why we got the bill wrong. That can be internal cost as well. Any waste, and we'll talk about lean, and we'll talk about the 7 wastes coming up. Failure analysis, that's again why we got it wrong. Late payments or expediting costs. So if we have things that are late, there's additional costs to that. I feel that if I sign up people late for a course, I have to pay expediting costs for the material, and sometimes I'm willing to eat that, and sometimes I'm not. But usually I am, and that's a real cost. So what can I do about that? I can start putting in, I can try and fix that if I want to, if it were a big enough cost for me to care about. On the left-hand side, we can talk about inspection costs, which is like quality audits, or vendor rating is another thing. There's a cost to that if we want to rate our vendors. And then there's prevention costs, which is what we're talking about. Again, we want to move toward these, but there's still a cost that's associated with it. Okay. That's really all I wanted to talk about in this. And like I say, it's a tool that you can use, I think, fairly sparingly. There's an example on here, and I think this is probably a good segue into when we do estimation. But the algorithm for cost of poor quality is really deciding about which defects really cost a lot for you, and then breaking them down and seeing how much they cost on a per error basis. So this happens to be for a external failure for a utility company, that example I gave before, for going out and fixing a furnace. And to do that, they have to, you can see that what we've done is we've done sort of ABC accounting on this. You have to take the repair call. There's somebody who's a dispatch technician. That takes some time. There's the repair. Then there's some administration, and there's some management time that's costs for looking at how well we're doing. If we look at that, here's the hourly rate. This is a little bit old, so those are low. And here's the cost of the task on how many hours it costs. Here's the material cost for each of those. There's a $50 cost on average on the cost of materials for the repair, a little bit on the call, and on the dispatch there's a service charge. So we can look and we can see, well, what's the cost of a nonconformance for 6/10 of an hour, $45 an hour, $15 charge of materials. And that's the total cost per failure. Look at how many failures. It comes to $261,000 a year. So that would be, in my opinion, one of these places where it looks like there's some good opportunity for this particular company. And anyway, that's how you'd have to do it in your business case. Okay, I'm going to move on. There's a little bit in the book about hard savings and soft savings, and we all know that there are some things that we choose. Soft savings are things that we essentially choose not to quantify, whereas hard savings are things that we, generally speaking, quantify, and we think that there's more of a cause and effect relationship from our project to creating those savings. At least that's the way that I think about it. In theory, any soft savings can be made into a hard savings if you work hard enough at it. In practice, it doesn't work out that way. So if you're in an IT project that's essentially deep in the bowels of the organization, and your work and somebody says, hey, we're going to get greater customer satisfaction out of this, that may not be very easy to quantify. It may not be worth the effort. On the other hand, it may be, in which case it goes into revenue enhancement in some sort of way. Most finance departments have their own guidelines for what counts and what doesn't, and what's hard and what's soft. And the back end of this is really a lesson on involving finance. And what I would encourage you all to do is go through this exercise that's given on 90, and you can ask me questions at our one-on-ones, or I can cover it next time if you'd like to. But I'd like you to try this exercise without looking at the next pages to see what the answer is, and see if you feel comfortable with your answer. When I've done this in a class of 20 people, I often come up with 20 different answers for what's the benefit. And the moral of that story is you got to go to finance and get some guidelines on how these things are counted. So you can see sort of this is a post hoc thing. A business with so many days in revenue per day in sales, they require 15 days on average. They reduce the time that it takes for them to deliver the product and to provide the company with an invoice. Okay, so there's all sorts of questions about how that's valued. And they also have full-time salary people who are doing this, doing the billing, and they can move them around. One person they are able to move into a different position, and so forth. Okay, so I encourage you to do this, but we're going to move on. Oops, I shouldn't do that. And to fill in the takeaways as you finish this. Before I move on, what questions do you have about cost of poor quality? Oops. Okay, great. It's a tool. It's a focusing tool that can help you. Remember the 4 different categories: external failures, internal failures, inspection, and prevention. Generally, we'll focus on the first 2 primarily, unless we have a real mature process, in which case we can eliminate some inspection. Okay, I want to talk to you just a little bit, and I don't want to take up too much time on this, but I do want to take enough time for us to get comfortable with this before we kind of go into estimation. And most of you, my guess is that you're pretty familiar with this, so I'm going to move pretty quickly through this. If any of you if any of you have ever bought a house, you know you make a mortgage payment, and those mortgage payments that you make are guided by these sorts of equations that we're going to be looking at. The two key concepts I want to take away from this are our present value, future value, net present value, and internal rate of return. Those are the concepts that I want us to take out, and we're going to use that in making our, at least partly, in making our business case. So those are the building blocks, along with cost of poor quality, are the building blocks of where we're going to build our business case from. So when we get through this, we really want to be able to, let's say, calculate present and future values of sums and annuities, but mostly, yeah, I just want you to get that, and then we'll move over to doing net present value. That happens to be my favorite. I like net present value more than I like IRR, and it's largely because IRR in some cases is not defined, and it can hide some things that net present value doesn't. There's a downside. The downside is you have to know the weighted average. You have to know the cost of capital, or guess at it, to calculate NPV. Okay, here's just in the demand process where you can use this, or where it's often used. Primarily in making the business case or in communicating and recommending future improvements for the process. It's a way of evaluating whether an investment in a project, an investment in an IT system, an investment in college, an investment in a house is worth making. That's really what it is. Okay, so before we go into this, I want us to just kind of, hopefully we're all on the same page here. There's a time value that's in money, okay? And that's due to largely to something called inflation, right? So if you look back, there's a wonderful book called How to Lie with Statistics. By the way, I'm just going to ask this. Has anybody ever read that? Anybody in our signed on ever read that? If you have, speak up, please.
No, I haven't.
I have not.
All right. Well, I think maybe what I'll do is I'll order a copy for everybody and get it sent the next time. Now, just to warn you, it was written in the early 60s, late 50s, so some of the language is a little bit, I would say, is not appropriate for today. It's not terrible or anything, but it's just it reflects the time it was written in. But what's really interesting is the very first example. By the way, How to Lie with Statistics is really how to catch people lying with statistics. That's why it's a great book. And it's very, very accessible. It's not a difficult book to read at all. But in the very first one, he talks about why you should send your son to Princeton, and he does it on the basis of because he or she, if it's your daughter, your child at Princeton, because if he graduates, he'll make $20,000 a year coming out of school. I don't think that you can afford Princeton coming out of it making $20,000 a year. Anyway, so money changes over time because of inflation, which tends to devalue it, but also because of uncertainty about the future, right? So because of those two things, we have a preference for liquidity. So it's who is it? Wimpy and Popeye, who had summed it up. I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. That's kind of the basis of why we invest in things or why we lend. Because of this, we can define things like the present value of sums that will occur in the future. Okay. Now, just the straightforward equation for understanding future values and present values are just essentially multiplied, are pretty straightforward, and I don't want to go through too much through this too much, tongue-tied here. But if I lend you $100 at a 10% annual interest, the next year you'll owe me $110, right? Okay, so that's essentially what the basis is for this. This is just mathematically how I express that. And if I have a 2-year accrual period or 2 interest periods, I'll have this I plus 1 raised to the 2th power, to the 2nd power. So I'll have I plus 1 plus the interest rate squared. Okay, so the future value that this is worth is the principal, or whatever that initial payment would be, multiplied by some factor that increases over time, right? 1 plus the interest rate raised to that power. Okay, so that's all well and good. So, you know, in the example I gave, $100 today, eventually I will collect $110 on that next year. But the real question is, how much is that $110 worth to me right now, right? Because there's other things. Having that $110 in the future, how much is that worth to me now? And if I determine that it's only worth $90 to me today, then I'm not going to lend you that $100. I'm going to keep it myself and invest it in something else. And that's kind of the basis of this. So even though this is the easy calculation, what we really care is the present value of that future sum of money. And that's expressed simply algebraically by solving this equation for P. And we get the present value. Okay, so far so good. That's all pretty straightforward. However, what if we have periodic payments? So if we have periodic payments, see, that principal keeps growing over time, but the interest amounts are differing. So if I loaned you $100 this year and then another $100 next year, and I was collecting this annual interest, I would be collecting the interest, but I would have additional cash flows going out and so forth. And that's just given by these formulas right here, where here is the the future value of an annuity. Here's the payment amount, and you can see it looks very similar, but there's a sum of these. We're making a series of periodic payments. Here's the payment amount, here's the interest rate, right here I, and then that annuity future value is the accrual of all those. But again, what we really care is is about B, which is the present value of that future sum of money, of W, right? So you'll see that's essentially W right there. It's just solved for the present value. Okay, so all of this is well and good, and if we were mathematicians, we'd want to calculate this out by hand, and you can do that, and it's lots of fun. But luckily, Excel has lots of features for doing this, and here's just a few of the functions. PV function in Excel is present value of an investment. FV is the future value. PMT is a payment value for a loan. And PER is the number of payment periods for an investment based on constant payments, and so forth, right? There's lots of stuff that's in there. So all that's well and good, and we can do all that stuff. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to take us into two other things that I think are going to be very helpful to us. The two concepts of the basis of these equations right here, the annuity equations and the future and present value equations, is there's a concept called net present value, which borrows both of those things. And again, we're going to use Excel because Excel actually calculates it for us. But net present value, without having to read the top part, is it looks at a series of future cash flows, and it says, here's how much that's worth today. Here's how much that is worth today. Okay? So, yes. Sorry about that. I keep getting a phone call. I'm going to turn this, I'm going to put my phone somewhere else so I'm not even hearing it. Okay. Essentially what we want to do is we want to see, in theory, if a series of future cash flows, say from doing a project like an improvement project, if that tends to be if that's greater than the amount of costs that we're going to incur, and the discount at which we're given future future cash flows, right? Because $100 next year is not worth $100 today. it's worth less than that, so we're going to discount that amount, a certain amount. Okay, so net present value is the value measured in today's dollars of a series of cash flows at different points of time. We want net present value to be greater than 0. That's a good thing if it is. Okay? In theory, if it's greater than 0, an organization should invest in that. In practice, there's many, many things that we can invest in, so we'll look at competing NPV values. Generally speaking, the higher the better. Okay? And we'll actually, there's some information here just to let you know that NPV in Excel requires equal periods. XNPV is some way to get around that. You can have unequal time periods. Second thing is internal rate of return. Now, internal rate of return, one of the problems with net present value is in order to calculate it, you have to essentially have the company's weighted average cost of capital. In other words, the cost of borrowing money for the company and acquiring that money. It's not just the cost of borrowing it, but it's the cost of acquiring it. And essentially the value of investing in other places. So given that, people seek to find a way of comparing things without having to type in a weighted average cost of capital. Okay, IRR is a method of that, and it essentially says, what discount do we need to give future cash flows such that the net present value is exactly 0? Okay, and that is the internal rate of return. So if we increase the amount of discount to future cash flows, instead of saying, you know what, that $100 next year, that's going to be worth $90 to me, if we said no, let's discount that all the way down to 90% to 10% to $10. $100 next year is worth $10 to me. Is it still worth them? Is it still a positive NPV? So we're looking for that to change that discount rate until we get an NPV of 0. When it's 0, that's the definition of what the internal rate of return is. The weighted average cost of capital for which NPV is 0. That's it. Okay? And we'll do an example and you'll see how that works. Okay. Now, a large IRR is good. Here's an example, and this is how it looks like in Excel. So you've got in this case, a small company is examining investing in productivity software. They determined the series of cash flows. So again, they have some business model that predicts these. We're going to make $150 next year, and $200 the next year, and $200 the next year, and $150 the year after, in year 5. Maybe those are thousands of dollars. But there's costs associated with it. So the net benefit the first year is minus $150,000, and then it's positive, 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 etc. Okay? So in NPV, here's the Excel statement that you would need, and here's the IRR statement that you would need. Okay? And this says essentially that if we assume that these are in thousands of dollars, that investing in this is worth today $266,000. So it's a positive net present value, maybe a decent return on a $150,000 investment. We're going to essentially, it's worth $266,000 to us. So that seems reasonable, and it's an internal rate of return of 107%. That means we'd have to discount these cash flows 107%. We have to put in a weighted average cost of capital of 107% in order to get a net present value of 0. Okay, so those are basically the two concepts. Now, I assigned you on the homework number 3, which is a project which a BB is allocating, which is a project where there's a return and there's some allocation. I think that's a good one, and it's one that you're probably going to look at. And I also put in this one, assigned you number 4, which is a calculation for a software program. This is going to take a little bit of understanding, putting things into net value. So just to be aware of that. I'd like to run through a couple of examples and show you something that I hope you'll find helpful in the homework as well. So before I do that, what questions do you have about NPV, annuity, future value, present value, IRR, any of what we just covered? Remember, we're just touching the surface here. I mean, financial engineering is a very deep subject. So we're just scratching the surface. Okay. All right, so I'm going to show you this one, and let's see. Oh, shoot, I thought I had it open. Junk. No, that's probably not in there. How about this? Yes. So you should have noticed, or you will have noticed in these, that I'm starting to embed a lot of these things right here. So these things. So if you double click on this, you'll just open up the file, and you can just work in that file directly. Okay? So it has this file, and if you save it, like for example, here's the software project one. You could just do it right in here. Okay? That's the software one. Here is one for. Here's an example for a project. And here's one I want to work through. But if you hit the Save button on this, the next time you open it, it'll be in there. So if you want to attach an Excel file, it's already there for you. Just make your changes in the Excel file, save it, close it, and when you send it back, I'll be able to look at it and we'll be able to talk about it. Okay? So let's walk through an example of how we might use this in our project. Let's suppose that, or in a calculation. And some of this will be straightforward and perhaps some of it won't be. So let's suppose we have a project and we might estimate the cost of that project. Suppose we have a business case where we're estimating 5 cash flow years of a $50,000 benefit the first year and then a $100,000 benefit in years 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now some people like to do 1 year. I can understand that at the end of a project annually, but let's write a good control plan. Let's get value, return value out of it year after year. That's the project I really want to invest in. And when I'm making a business case, that's the bold statement I want to make. I don't want to make a, hey, it's worth a 1 year. This is what it's worth. I want to put the big picture in. You bet IT projects are done that way. Okay. So let's walk through that. So suppose these are the cash flows. Well, to do net present value, I need to know the net benefit, not just the total benefit, right? So if I do that, I'm going to insert a thing. I'll write in here net benefit. And here's a little like cost of poor quality thinking on this. So let's suppose I have a black belt at 40%, 3 green belts at 15% allocation, I've got 1 SME. Yeah, let's do 1 SME at 30%, and 2 executives, one who's a process owner, one who's a sponsor, but they're at a very small allocation of 3%. Okay? So let's just go through that calculation, and again, I think that hopefully this will not present any problems for folks. Here's the allocation. I've just taken a swag at what a loaded salary might be at ABC company, whatever that company is. Black belt, the loaded salary, including benefits and overhead, $110,000 annually. Green belt, $80,000. The SME is $60,000. Let's say it's a technician. The executive, $200,000. Obviously, those numbers really vary by industry and company. So I've left a blank here, and that probably means I need to calculate something. So one other thing I need to calculate then is and it says here the project, we're gonna make a swag, and we're gonna say this project is gonna last 5 months. So this would be maybe 5 months salary. So again, this is straightforward. It's just the allocation times, let's see, let's leave the allocation out. I'm just going to put in the loaded salary times 5 months. So that's equal 5 divided by 12 equals this times 5 divided by 12. Makes sense? So if it lasts 5 months, I'm burning up, if I had the BB full-time, Let's put the allocation in there as well. I'll multiply by the allocation. If I had the BB full-time, it would be 45 grand, but since I've got the BB 40%, that's $18,000 cost, and we can look at it right there. So if we really keep the exact, oh, I said 3%, so let's put in 3. If I really kept the executive involvement to 3%, that's what it would cost. Oops, but I need to put in the number of people. So there's only one BB, but there's 3 green bees. Green belts. Okay, there's 3 green belts, and I've obviously got this wrong, so I need to figure that one out. The SME, there's 1 SME and there's 2 executives. Okay, so now let's figure out what the total cost for the line item. Well, that's just equal then to the salary, the total salary number times the number of people who are here, and let's bring that down. So the cost for the project, not including any material costs, if there are any yet, this is just labor cost, would be the sum of that. Okay, so far so good. I've got the cost of this project is $45,000. And now for the purposes of this, I'm going to be real about this, and I'm going to put in a maintenance cost. So if we're going to assume that we're going to get yearly benefit year in and year out, there's probably going to be some maintenance on the SOPs that I generate. If I have control charting or reporting, there's going to be some cost that I accrue to do that. I'm going to use a 20% number. Some people are aggressive and use 10%. I'm going to be a little bit conservative and use 20%. So I use 20% times this number. Whoops, 20% times that number, mark. And there we go. So $10,000 maintenance cost. I'll put that in there. So those are my costs, and then I'll just make that the same running across. Okay, so there's my cost, so I can easily do my net benefit now. It's just equal to the benefits minus the costs. So there's a series of cash flows that I'm getting. Okay, so now let's just do it for this. So let's suppose that we have a 14% weighted average cost of capital, and you can think of this in a different way. Think of it in terms of if you were investing, if you had a big chunk of money and you wanted to invest in it, that money would be competing for all sorts of other investment opportunities, and sort of the cost of investing for you would be that you couldn't invest that money in the other opportunities. So 14% is a pretty conservative number. It's saying that I think that I could get 14% return on this money if I just used, I'm pretty sure I could get a 14% return on this money if I used it in a different way. So I'm going to compare it to that. So if we do that, then the weighted average cost of capital is 14%, and the net present value is equal to NPV. You all see this? I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so that you can see it now. Equals NPV. Oops, not NPF, NPV. I need to put in, you'll see that it's helping me. I need to put in the rate. And now I need to put in the series of cash flows. And that's it. So it says that, oh, this is a pretty decent project. It's worth $300,000 to me today. $299, $488. Among friends, that's $300,000. What's the internal rate of return on this? Now, this is a little bit different. Here, I need to put in the values of the cash flows, and I need to put in a guess at my IRR. So if I put in a guess of, say, 90% IRR, that would be 0.9. If I guessed that my internal rate of return was 50%, I'd put in a 0.5. Let me try in a 0.5. Now, you'll find it doesn't matter that much. We'll do a couple of them, and you'll see it doesn't matter that much. Usually, you get the same answer. Occasionally, in pathological cases, you get different answers. Oh, what did I do wrong? Did something wrong. Doesn't like that. That says 0.9. Well, this is not good. I thought I... Oh, I'm sorry. I need the net numbers. Ah, right. Yeah, IRR is a little bit tricky. You have to sort of define year one. Oh, and I also used the wrong numbers on here. Sorry about that, folks. Now you guys caught me on that. So I've got to use in my... Let me try this again. I've got the rate, but then I've got to use the net numbers. Worth considerably less. This is then, I've got to put in IRR of, let's see, the values, 0.9 or 90%, still giving me the number. I may have to put in a year one of 0. No, it doesn't like that. It shows you how often I use IRR. I'm not a huge fan of IRR. Sorry about this. Needs contiguous ones, I think. Oh, I think I got it. It likes seeing the first year as an investment. So it would say that this investment is upfront and that this occurs in year 2 and year 3. Let's just check that. Let's check that out. Suppose that this was 25% net. Yeah, see, it needs that first year of a negative investment. So it needs an initial investment so that there's initial negative. Which kind of makes sense in the sense that we're really looking at year 1. You invest in a project up front, so that can be a negative, and after year 1, you're accruing that benefit. So that's not an unreasonable way to look at it. But just to give you an idea, if we put, let's see, 435 here, you can see that we have a net present value of about 0. And that's what the internal rate of return means, that we would have to have a tremendous, in this case, a tremendously huge discount rate in order to make this project a break-even project. So that's pretty, when we're looking at that cash flow. So if we have a 14%, I'm sorry, it was, yeah, 14%, it's worth $213,000, that's an internal rate of return of 435%. Again, remember, internal rate of return is the weighted average cost of capital for which net present value is 0. So if I put in 435% weighted average cost of capital, that's a lot. I get a 0 NPV. So this is not a bad investment at all. And it makes a pretty good case for that. All right. Now the negative side, just to point this out, there is a negative to this, right? Because in theory, you could run out NPV over 10 years or over 20 years, or make it as long as you want to get a good number for your NPV. So do spend some time talking with people about, should we count this as 3 years or should we count it as 5 years or whatever. It varies. I like either 5 or 3. I think that's reasonable for a process improvement. Write a good control plan. You ought to be getting 3 years of benefit out of it, at least. I think it's not an unreasonable argument to say after that, technology would have allowed us to catch up anyway, so it's not going to count. I'm fine with that. Or maybe it's after 5 years, depending on where you are. But up front, this is the sort of thinking that you'll want to have. Okay. Hopefully that wasn't too bollock stuff. And I apologize for the I had forgotten about that you need a negative year in your IRR calculation. Okay. Just the way that the mathematics work out. I've got something in La La Land that is not allowing me to use my computer here. So bear with me for just a moment. Okay, there we go. Yeah. I'm going to cut this. I'll shut that down. Okay. So that's in our So hopefully you got two things out of it. One is how to calculate that stuff if you didn't already know. And then the second is modifying these files. You can just do it directly in the program and that'll work. Okay. I want to spend some time at this point talking a little bit more about business cases and continuing on that. And in order to do that, we're going to go a little bit off the page. Like I said, we're going to we've covered mathematics of interest. We're going to cover something called estimation, and then we'll talk about business cases. Hopefully this will be well worth your time. So in order to do that, let me crank up my whiteboard, and we'll just kind of do this. And I can save this. I can save the slides, so to speak, that we create later. So you'll notice that when we did the calculation for the gas company, where it was sending a repair person in, we needed to do an estimate of what that defect was actually worth. Now, a lot of people shy away from that, but it's absolutely necessary in building a business case. You're going to have to estimate certain things. Sometimes people really shy away from big numbers, from small numbers, or things like that. What I can tell you is if you put your brain to it and you look at it from a process-based transaction, you can usually find a reasonable way of paying for it. I just want to illustrate that there's, and I think you'll find this a lot of fun. I hope you'll find it a lot of fun. Like I said, a lot of people kind of shy away from it, from estimation, and I think the reason why is because we either have very large numbers or very, very small numbers. Maybe I should have drawn it this way. We have very large numbers, or we have very small numbers, right? 1 over infinity, that's a very small number. And I think that there's a fellow named Shelby Foote, who I think some of you will probably know. He died a little while back, but he was a Civil War historian. In an interview I saw him give, he said that he was talking about the Battle of Shiloh, which was kind of a jolt to everybody in the country about how many people died. And he said there was one senator who offered to mop up all the blood that would be shed in the Civil War by using a pocket handkerchief. And he said, well, it'd be an interesting calculation. He said you could probably get your PhD calculating how many pocket handkerchiefs it would take to wipe up all the blood that was spilled in the Civil War. Well, I think that the answer, it's interesting that he would say something like that because it's not that difficult of an estimation. Now, we're not going to do that one, but we'll do a couple of different ones. There was a man named Enrico Fermi who was a great scientist in the 20s and 30s and 40s, Nobel Prize winner, who used to encourage his students to do these sorts of things. And this was before Google, so you couldn't look up things like that. And his classic question was estimate the number of piano tuners who live in Chicago. We're also not going to do that one, but we'll start with using something that's maybe something that may not be easy for us to come to mind. So I know there's a silly problem, but what if we ask the question, how many ants could fit in a 1-gallon jug? Okay, silly question, but just to illustrate that, I mean, how many ants could fit in? I bet if I asked you all to guess, you'd come up with answers. You'd say, well, I think that maybe there's, I don't know, if you're like my daughter, you might say maybe 100 ants. Or if you're like my son, you'd say, well, you'd probably say something about radioactive ants that were giant and you wouldn't even get one in. No, seriously. I mean, some of you would maybe say 1,000, or maybe it's 100,000, maybe it's 1 million, maybe it's 1 billion. Let's find out. Let's see if we can do that. So what we might start out with is the model of an ant. Here's my little ant. And we know that an ant has 6 legs, right? Okay, if we start out with that, one thing we might consider is that an ant is kind of like a little box. I know it's a little bit different, but the volume of an ant is maybe like a little box, where it's maybe 3 millimeters long, it's maybe 1 millimeter wide, and maybe 1 millimeter high. Okay, so the volume of an ant is about 3 millimeters cubed, right? 3 cubic millimeters. So if I take 3 millimeters times 1 millimeter times 1 millimeter, I get 3 cubic millimeters. That's the size of an ant. Okay. All right, now how about my gallon jug? Looks like an apple. Wait a second, I have to put a base on it. Maybe I got some moonshine in there. I have to take that out to get my ants in. The ants will be partying down there if otherwise. Okay, so that's my gallon jug. So I've got 1 gallon. Now I'm going to use something that's called what I learned in chemistry is called the factor label method. And it's almost like algebra, another one of your favorite subjects, I'm sure. But what it is it's essentially a unit conversion. We have a volume here, and we have a volume here, but they're not equivalent volumes. So we have to get everything in the same volume. So essentially what we'd like to know is how many cubic millimeters is a gallon, because then I can tell you how many 3 cubic millimeter units can fit inside that gallon. Well, we know that there's about 4, I'm going to make this easy. I'm going to use the metric system. There's about 4 liters in 1 gallon. So now I can cancel out gallons. You see that? Gallon canceled with gallons. And I know that there's about 1,000 cubic centimeters. In fact, there's exactly 1,000 cubic centimeters in 1 liter. A liter, in fact, the definition of a liter is a cube with a 10 centimeter side. So 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000. 1,000 cubic centimeters in a liter. And, of course, there's for every 1 millimeter, oops, I'm sorry, for every 1 centimeter, there's 10 millimeters. So in a cubic centimeter, there's 1,000 cubic millimeters. Oops, millimeters. Yeah, you can read that. So it's about 4 times 10 to the 6 millimeters cubed. 10 to the 6, that's 4 million. So about 4 million millimeters cubed. And if my ant is 3 millimeters cubed, that means I can fit about 4/3 million ants, or 1.33 million ants inside of that jug. Okay? So now we know the answer to that. There's about 1/3 million ants. Now, of course, we could use a bigger ant or a smaller ant, right? And that would give us a little bit different calculation, and that's kind of the uncertainty. But guess what? All business cases have that sort of thing. So I'm making an assumption here. In this case, I only really have one assumption. How big is the ant? That's the only assumption I have, and yet I can come up with a pretty good answer. If I wanted to get a better answer, what I might do is specify the ant I'm talking about, or I might give a high, low, and medium for the sizes of the ants and calculate different values for each of them. You can see how this works. In an Excel spreadsheet, we could do this over and over and over, and it wouldn't take any time. So we can fit about 1.3 million ants into that jug, unless we crush them first. Okay. All right, so now let's ask a different question, and maybe something that's a little more relevant. So suppose we want to know how many babies are born annually, no, daily, in U.S. hospitals. So we could start out with that. So again, that's a fairly straightforward calculation, but I think you'll see the same way. So now I need some volunteers here. So what might be a reasonable number for, say, a typical hospital? How many babies are born in a given day?
15.
15 babies per day. Now, if you didn't know that, you could go back one day. So if you didn't know that, you might start with how many in a month, or how many in a week, or how many in a year, and those might be easier things to look up or to find or to estimate, right? And now this should be a fairly straightforward calculation. We really just need the number of hospitals, right? So the number of U.S. hospitals, and that'll tell us.
500.
I'm sorry?
5,500.
5,500. Okay, got it. So we've got 5,500 hospitals. So it's 5,500 times 15, and that's it. And that's going to give us the answer, right? So we've got 55,000 plus about 12,000, right? So doing that in my brain, so it's about
82,500.
82,000. Thank you. Who was that? Was that John? Okay. Well, I couldn't tell whether it was John or Mr. Spock from Star Trek. Thank you for the precise answer. That was meant to be a compliment, by the way.
Thank you.
80,000. So you said 82,000. Okay, great. So there you go. And so something like that is a fairly straightforward calculation. And this you could look up on the internet, but there's plenty of other things that you can't. Here's another thing that, given the number of vampire movies that are coming out that might be interested, vampire I'm writing. So let's see how much. An interesting question would be like how much blood. Human blood is in the world, right? If you're a vampire and you want to know what's the population of vampires that can grow. I'm just having some fun here. But the reason why I'm doing this is because the answers are sometimes kind of surprising. So if we take, how many people are in the world? About 7 billion, is that right? 7 times 10 to the 9th people. That's a 7 with 9 zeros. If you're not familiar with this notation, it's a 7 with 9 zeros after. Okay? And then, let's see. So, how much blood is in a human being? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
5 liters?
5 liters? Yeah, I think, if I recall, there's about 6 in a man, and there's a little bit less in a woman, but there's a lot less in children, right? So I like that guess 5. I'm going to downgrade it just a little bit to 4. Now, we can obviously look this up and change this, but there's a reason why I'm doing that. So 4 liters is about 4 liters, right? But there's about 4 liters in 1 gallon. I'm just making my calculation a little bit easier. So Tracy, your answer is probably righter than mine, but mine will be quicker to do here, which is why I'm doing that. And it turns out there's about, for 1 cubic foot, there's about 7.5 gallons. Okay? So the 4's cancel here. So I've got 7 billion people and about 7.5 gallons. If I divide that out, I get something like 930, now I'll write out the million cubic feet of blood in the world. Now, what's interesting to me then is to say, well, is that a big number or a small number? How big is that? So how might we put that into context? Any thoughts? That's the amount of human blood that's in the world. Seems like a lot. Well, here's one way of doing it. One way of doing it would be to say, well, what's the cube root of this? And then envision a cube of that size and see how big that is. That might be one way of doing it. Another way, which I think is a better way of, is anybody a Cowboys fan? Nobody's a Cowboys fan? Uh-oh.
Yes, I'm a Cowboys fan.
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, does anybody know the volume of Cowboy Stadium?
I want to say 90,000.
It's actually 104 million cubic feet. I looked it up. So the interesting thing is here that if we divide this out, it looks like all the human blood could fit into 9 Cowboy stadiums. That's pretty amazing, huh? That doesn't seem like all that much to me. A lot of people. Anyway, hopefully you found that was kind of interesting. But now let's go to a more reasonable or realistic scenario. And let's see. Oh yes, I want to get out of this now. Let's go to a more reasonable scenario, and I want to open up a situation where you might want to use it. So here's an example of where you use a lot of estimation to go in here, and I'll show you how I did this. This is one of the cases where we wanted to estimate how much of an IT labor would be used in developing a particular solution. At least one of the people on the phone call will probably recognize this. Now this has been cleansed a little bit, so that's essentially what we did. We said, well, what's it going to take to build this? Well, there's some architecture and some design. Design of the application, design of the database, design of the security. There's concept design. And here's our estimated hours. And we did a high estimate and a low estimate. If you want to know a lot about this, and we looked at the average of those two in 2 different ways. And if you want to know more about this, to really there's a great book called Guesstimation, and you can get it. It's from, I think, Princeton Press. But they talk a little bit about when you should use an arithmetic average and when you should use a geometric average for your estimates. The short answer to that will be when a median makes more sense, you'll want to use the geometric average. When an average makes sense, you'll want to use the arithmetic average. That's just the short answer. I'll draw a picture of that in just a moment. But anyway, we did it in 2 different ways. Designing the screens, here's how much it would take, number of screens, high and low. And you can see we're just breaking this up into its constituents and making its estimate. This is exactly what you would do on a project if you're estimating how long something's going to take, and it gets to what we'll talk about later as work breakdown structure. But this could work the same way when you're estimating the value of something. So you can see documentation, reporting, application service layer. Well, we need the program to talk to the product database. We also need to exchange with database 2, whatever that is, and we need a security database. This is the hours that it's going to take us to do it. And here's some other database interfaces and how much time it's going to take to work with those, high and low, and again, what those averages are. Business controls and reporting. And then testing. It's going to take us some time to test it. And you can see we built in a lot of time for testing. Put in a management load. There's got to be time to manage the programmers on this. And here's what the total time is in hours, our high, our low, and our averages right there. Okay? And this happened to be for something, I've always got assumption pages. So this happened to be for a project where there were 4 different such functions, and eventually bubbling it back up to here's what the FTE equivalent is. On the high side, we need 20 people. On the low side, it's going to be an FTE equivalent of about 5.7. And here's what the cost is at $100 an hour estimate. Bam. So now we kind of know what we're up against. On the low side, $1 million. On the high side, $4 million. And on the predicted side, somewhere between 2.2 and 2.6 is where we'd estimate that to be. So for budgeting purposes, maybe you want to use 2.4, something like that. And then the question is, all right, that's the cost. What are the benefits going to be? Should we do this or not? Can we actually raise that kind of money? Because it's actually going to cost that much. So So that's it. I mean, in a nutshell, that's it. Now, I did want to show you, at least pictorially, what I meant by the geometric average and the other. When you have something and you're estimating, time is a good example for where geometric average often works. The geometric average is, we all know what the average is of two things, right? If I have the two numbers, 10, well, no, let's say 1 and 100, right? We all know the average of that. It's called the arithmetic average, and or the straight average. We just call that the average. And we often use this. It's just the sum of these two divided by the number, right? So in this case, it's 101 divided by 2, so the arithmetic average is 50.5. That makes sense to everybody, I hope. It's 101 hey, come on. It's 101 divided by 2. The geometric average is a slightly different concept, and it's often a better estimate when, like, if you think that the time that it's going to take something is to do something is anywhere between 1 and 100 hours, and maybe I'd think that it would be shaped like a bell curve. Like, it's pretty unlikely it's going to take 100. It's pretty unlikely it's going to take 1. It's probably going to take something like this. That's when you'd want to use the straight average. On the other hand, you'd use a geometric average if you think that maybe the distribution would look like this. Like, it's unlikely it's going to be 1. It's unlikely it's going to be 100, but it's more likely that it's going to be like 25, right? Or it's going to be less than that. It's going to be shaped like this. The likelihood that it's going to be really short is pretty high. The likelihood that it's going to be really long is pretty low. But let's put in a best and worst case scenario, because sometimes you can elicit that from people when you're interviewing them. The geometric average is the factor that goes from 1 to 100 in that intermediate step, Now, once I show you the answer, you'll wonder why I even bothered defining it, because the answer is simple. The answer is 10. The geometric average of 1 and 100 is 10 because 1 times 10 is 10, and 10 times 10 is 100. It's the factor that factors both of them to give you the final answer from the beginning. Okay? So you can see that if you have a scenario that's something like, I shouldn't have put it in the 25, but that's something like this, you'll want to use a geometric average, and if it's something like this, you'll want to use a arithmetic average. When the answers are balanced, it doesn't matter. They give you basically the same answer. So if somebody said, well, it should be anywhere from 50 to 100, the answer of the geometric and arithmetic average is going to be about the same. Okay? I'll say that this is a star quality if you're using this. If you just use the arithmetic average, you're doing a lot better than most folks are. You're already putting in the high and the low, which is excellent practice in doing the business case. Okay. Questions before I move on? I'm going to move past estimation now to actually talking about business cases, and we'll kind of put some things together. Questions, comments? Okay. By the way, if you ever want to get hired by a management consultant firm or Microsoft or something like that, these are great things to get used to doing well. A friend of mine was hired by McKinsey, and the only question he was asked on an interview was to estimate the market of razors in the Soviet Union. That's to tell you how old it was. The questioning. And he got hired because he said, well, you have to consider what's the percentage of men with beards. Okay. Let's move on to business case now. Okay, so business case is kind of like a culmination of a number of different things. One is, it has to have some good estimating in it. So there's some estimation, and for this we can use what we just did, what we call Fermi estimates, or what I called Fermi estimates. We can also use cost of poor quality, Or we could use this good old sort of what I'd call ABC accounting, which is sort of like saying, okay, I'm going to go through and I'm going to do not cost accounting, but I'm going to do the accounting based on what the activities in this particular effort are. We would think of it in terms of what the activities in the process are, and what the line items are as well in that. So it takes some estimation, but it also is going to take some structure. And I'll get into this in just a moment. And it's going to take some imagination. Okay, so those are sort of the elements of a business case that you need to kind of put into it. And this is just kind of my opinion. Perhaps it's not shared by everybody, but here are my thoughts on, I've looked at so many different business cases, and I've built them, and I've been aghast at the lack of them in many cases, and I've been aghast at the complexity of some of them in many cases. But here are just my thoughts. First of all, you know what? Actually, before I do this, I'm going to poll you guys. I'd like you to take 30 seconds, take a piece of paper, write on that piece of paper. If you're taking notes on the notebook, write on the notebook. Write down what you think are the key aspects of a business case that you'd like to see. Like, it needs to be blank. We're talking about like VOC land, right? So if you're the customer of a VOC, of a business case, somebody gives it to you, you say, I need this business case to be blank. Don't tell me what it's supposed to have in it. Tell me what it's supposed to be. Okay? Take 30 seconds to just write down adjectives that fit that. Okay. Hopefully you've got some. So let's start with John. How about I put you on the spot? John, what's an attribute of a business case that you would really like to see? Of a good business case. Okay, I guess I really put you on the spot. Is there? Let's see, Tracy. What can I get you to volunteer?
I don't know if I got it right, but like an attribute of what I want to see with a business case is that it's compelling.
I love it. Compelling. It needs to be compelling. Okay, got it. Right. Excellent. That's a great adjective. That's exactly what I was looking for. So yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't being very clear. Okay. Let's see. How about Patrick? What's something that you wrote down?
Patrick stepped out. He had to go take an early lunch.
Okay.
But I can answer in his stead if you'd like.
Oh, please do.
Yeah. Okay. One thing I want to see is it nice and simple.
Ah, simple. Okay. And I'm going to put in, I had the word clear written down, which is not quite the same. And I also had the word transparent written down. Okay? Simple, clear, transparent. Love it. I hate that 40-page Excel spreadsheet that nobody really understands and it's just kind of dumped over, and people say, yeah, this is our business case. Oh, drives me crazy.
Exactly.
Okay.
I had short.
Okay, short. So, yeah, I think all those kind of go Together,
Yeah.
not quite the same, but they're all together. Okay, great. Sue, can I ask you to give us an attribute?
Sure. You guys have said some of them already, to the point, clear, etc. But I also have
Yep.
minimal or no lingo. You know, all those acronyms and all those extra words and.
Okay, yeah, minimal lingo.
Hidden code.
Exactly.
Right. So, yeah, and you know, sometimes I think it's not so much that it's yeah, it'd be good if you could explain it to your mom or dad, but sometimes it has to be in the language to whom you're giving it, right? So if you're doing an IT project, just like I did before, to talk about the effort that you put into the database is okay, right? Database may be a bit lingo-ish, or application service layer, that's definitely in speak in IT world. But if you're giving it to IT people, then it's okay.
Absolutely. You have to know your audience.
Yep. Okay, great. The other thing that I want to put in here is I have the word bold. I have have a personal preference for writing bold business cases. I like it if it's okay if somebody says, Mark, no, that's too much or that's overreaching. That's okay when I show that. But I found that there's too many things that if you propose them, that they just end up not being that important or not important enough to complete with absolutely 100%. And, you know, businesses these days are so lean that we just can't afford to fund things in a half-blanked manner, if you know what I'm saying, right? If we're going to fund it, if it's important enough to fund, we're going to fully fund it. We're going to really kick butt on it, right? So I think it's okay to have a bold vision for this. So I think that's great. Above all, a business case needs to be shared, needs to be socialized. And remember the point that I had before about going to finance with things. And I think I said I uttered a phrase that I don't want to repeat today to Sue yesterday, but in putting together our business case for the Net Promoter Score project, what we want to do is we want to be able to take this to the, if possible, to the CFO, and to have the CFO say, no, that's not the business case. I think you ought to look at it this way. Because then we're getting, first of all, great direction from a real expert, and second, we're building that trust and that communication for how much this is really going to be worth going forward. And the more we can do that, the better it's going to be. Now, if you've ever seen people working with real business cases who are whizzes at this, and Frank is that's the CFO of Kinetic here. Frank is one of these guys who works with it. He uses a business case. It almost is like a piece of clay that the sculptor uses, and he molds it and he plays with it, and he comes up with something that he says, okay, this is the picture that I think I can present that makes the most sense to me for why this is going to make sense to our senior management and why we ought to invest in this opportunity. Because remember, it really is a story. And I think with, Tracy, you said compelling. I think kind of implicit in here is it tells a good story, right? It has a strong narrative. And it kind of goes along with this bold, but it's not exactly the same, so we'll keep it separate. Okay, so I think that all of these are great attributes, and there's probably a few more that we could think of. But I want to share with you one more way of kind of thinking about this. I also talked about structure. So let's talk about structure. Structure of a business case. And I'll share with you just the one that I kind of start out with. I also like starting out on a blank piece of paper, PowerPoint document, or whatever, instead of just saying, hey, here's our template. But if you want a template, this is kind of it, for me anyway, that I like to start out with. Because I go into so many different companies that they have their own structure, but I find that sometimes asking the top questions are helpful. I basically say a business case is going to be one of a few things. Let's start out with this. I say that there's going to be some, in our world, there's going to be some expense or margin or profitability play, right? So, for example, in Jim's project, which he was not able to make the second half of this, in Jim's project, he is doing a manufacturing floor project for a supplier in the auto industry. He is improving essentially it's a material handling process. So in that particular process, they have forklifts all over, and they're inefficiently done. Their utilization is not very good. So he's going to increase the utilization. There is, in his project, there's an expense save because we're going to free up some capacity on the by having better utilization of our forklifts. We'll be able to remove some forklifts and get rid of them. So there's an expense save there, and probably there will be some forklift operators that can be they can be reassigned. So there's some savings there. Additionally, there's production downtime, so they can reduce production downtime, and that's an expense save as well. Okay, because they have right now they have a number of people who are idle, and they can make an FTE reduction in their production line if they need to. Okay, so there's one line right there. The second is revenue enhancement. Now, there's a big one here, but this would be like I think we all have a good handle on expense save, but revenue enhancement, this can come in a lot of different ways. It can mean additional customers. So certainly the the NPS, Net Promoter Score project, Sue, that you have is certainly put up on that one. Brad, are you still on the line?
I sure am.
Yeah. So what would be some line items in yours for revenue enhancement?
Well, hopefully, if we can decrease the LWAT out of the ED, although we're actually pretty good there as a system, but if we can increase our customer service and actually get more patients coming through, that would be a revenue enhancement there.
Right. So this could be essentially greater throughput. Oops. Greater throughput. Throughput is just the number of units I'm putting through my process per unit time. So yeah, you've got a greater throughput. So at the end of the day, you served more customers. For everybody on the line, Brad, your project is to decrease the time it takes to discharge folks. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, got it. So it's a discharge at a hospital. We can all, I'm sure, relate to that to a certain extent. Okay, so we have that. And Sue, additionally, there's some other revenue enhancement opportunities on your project. What are some of the things that we talked about on your project?
I would have to look it up, but I think we talked about, did we talk about retention?
We did. We talked about retention. So retention is a great one. We can talk about retention or loyalty, right? So that's a good play for revenue enhancement too. So a lot of the process work that we do is really geared at not just obtaining the customer or obtaining more customers, but it's getting greater market share. That's another one. Greater market share out of that customer, or having them stay with us longer, retaining them. So we could talk about lifetime value of a customer. So
we talked about also increased pricing power.
Oh yeah, right. That's another thing, is that if we can also increase pricing power. Right. So that happens in a lot of cases with like, you know, the Ritz-Carlton, for example. They offer better service. They can charge more for it largely because they do it so well. Lexus is another one of those things where they do it so well that they can charge what they charge. And there's lots of different things that we can put in here. On Jim's project, the reason why I put greater market share here is that that's one of the value plays in his is they're covering orders. Let's suppose they're for brake pads. I don't think they are, but let's say they're for brake pads. You know, General Motors can go to all sorts of different suppliers. Let's say they need 100,000, 100,000. That's peanuts for them, but 100,000 units. They might go to ABC company for 20 and XYZ company for 80. Well, if you're ABC company, you want a greater amount of those orders. So that's another thing. It's not getting extra customer, but it's getting a bigger part of that order. So there's all sorts of different ways that are there. Additionally, there can be cash flow advantages too. So this particularly comes in with when you're doing something quicker. So if you're, say, reducing receivables, reducing receivables, right? If you're reducing the amount of time that it takes for a customer to make a payment, if you're working with revenue cycle type projects or billing cycle type projects, that sometimes is a big thing that matters. There was one company that I was looking through where we reduced the time that it took them to get financial aid flowing for a customer. This was, again, a university. We reduced it by 9 days, and everybody thought, well, that's no big deal. It's 9 days. Well, when we looked at it, we're talking about well over, you know, $1 billion of cash flow. And if you look at what 9 days means on that, it's a heck of a lot. So all of those things can be put into revenue enhancement. The third category, and now I've run out of room here, but the third category I have is risk mitigation. Now again, people have different categories, but I found that these three are usually pretty good to get started. And sometimes these are avoidance of lawsuits, but more often than not, people accept it as a percentage of some of the other stuff. Sometimes any one of these three categories can dominate. Most of the time, it's either going to be expenses or revenue. And I would say if you spend a lot of your time on these two, for most projects, it's going to yield some good dividends in business case. So let me show you at least a few examples of some of the business cases that I've done, and just some of the differences in them. Oh yeah. Oh shoot. Okay, there we go. Back to here. Now these are these have been sanitized. So just to give you an idea. So here's, for example, a company that was not doing any business cases whatsoever, and so I was given a portfolio of 10 green belts. And the very first thing I said is, well, okay, so which projects should we kill and which ones should we keep? Because they don't sound so good. And so, or at first blush. And when I did an assessment, we looked at 10 different projects. This was done in a day. And then in the evening, I went back and I did a business case for each one of these. So that's how fast we needed to do it. I had the names are blocked out for their own protection. And this did happen to be an insurer. But you can see that there's things like improved telecommunicator support process, reduce mail shipped to service centers, improve SCR turnaround. That's a system change request. That's IT. Here is an incentive that's lined up to the strategy map. So they were using strategy maps as a company to line up their projects, and this was just a picture that shows which ones are lined up with which. You see a lot of red here. Red was lined up with ease of doing business. Green was growing the customer base, essentially. And blue was improving medical cost trend. So medical cost trends in the insurance industry are all trending up, but this was basically a project that was geared at slowing that trend. You can see they're skittish about blue and green, but they have no problem doing the red. They're seeing red at this company. That's a red flag, right? Because it comes up and it says, hey, you guys are doing all these revenue expense reduction projects, but your strategy says you're trying to grow the company. Something's not right here. And then here are the values that are estimated from them. You can see a tremendous difference in the values. You know, some are worth 80,000 and others are worth 700. Here's $1 million projects. Here's a 1.4 million. And I'll show you the level at which some of these were done. So let's take a look at the SCR. That's number 5. Oh, that's overpayment. Here's a system change request. Okay, so very simple. This is working around number of workarounds per week, how long a workaround takes, what the hourly cost is. Here's the cost of a workaround. Here's how many there are in here. Done. Okay, that's worth $78,000 if we fix it all. Here's unrealized benefit of enhancements. Right. So the first is eliminating the cost of the workarounds. The second is that's an expense. Here's actually realizing the benefits of these IT changes. Value of the current basket, $1 million. Value of the improved basket, 1.1. Improvement per quarter, $100,000 annually. That's that. So if we could actually improve it, it'd be worth that much. Now you can see there's a very, very, very high-level business case, right? But they didn't have anything, so we had to get started. And you can see, here it is. Wouldn't be surprised if this is 3 or 5 times the number given. This is a total guess. I'm admitting it. And I want people to talk about this. But it's if you're doing an IT project and you're saying, hey, we're trying to do more IT changes per quarter or per year, well, that's got to be part of the value, is realizing the benefit of those IT changes, right? So here's that line for that, and so forth. And you can see just adding it all up, it gives us this 517. It didn't even I just did an annual. Some of them are done for 3 year, but there you have it. Okay, so this is a very, very high level one that was done very quickly. Sometimes that's acceptable. I would say for our projects, I'd like to do a lot better than this. Do as I say, not as I do. Okay, so here's one that's sort of an intermediate case, and I'll show you this one. This was for a, oops. Oh, right, I can't do it in this. I've got to do it in, maybe it'll work. Oh, it does. Okay. So this was done on 4 business cases over the course of assessing processes and doing a full process assessment for a moderate-sized company, 1,500 employees, $100 million in revenue, and we did 4 business cases. We looked at about 20 potential projects. We chose to do 4, and you can see that this is like a call center. You've got documentation, you've got queuing, you've got system downtime. I just want to show you kind of what this was, how we approached this. Let me take a look at system documentation. Yeah, let's look at system documentation. A business narrative. And you'll notice all these things fit on a page. It's a big page, but it fits on a page. Number of approvals annually. We actually looked that up, so high and low and estimate are right on top. But number of members lost in the system annually. This was based on data, but it was still pretty uncertain data. In 2 weeks, you can gather what you can gather. We're admitting it right here. This is the members. This is the percentage lost, the number that are lost in the system annually, percent that could be converted. So in other words, we're saying that these are people that are lost in the system. We could sign them up as customers. We can't sign them all up. We know that. But they're simply lost. So we lose that opportunity for revenue. So you can see that this is a revenue enhancement. And then here's the potential that we could have. These are members that we already have that we're not trying to keep. And you can see that, again, there's a high, low, and medium on this. And this is additional revenue that's captured for each one of these. And this is the total annual benefit, somewhere between 30,000. You can see it varies quite a bit. So you'd want to tighten up this business case for sure. But we give a high, low, and an estimated. And that's what the data we're able to bear. On some of the other ones, we had much more detailed data, and we could do that. And on the bottom, we have project costs estimated. So we'll estimate the project costs, and including maintenance costs of 15%. And all of that rolls up into this. So you'll see that here's our status documentation. And here are the estimated benefits. 366,000 annually. Risk reduction opportunity of 55,000 for total annual benefits of 421. Here's the cost of the project. Here's the maintenance cost. And here are the year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 benefits. This is what the 5-year net present value is. Here's what the 3-year net present value is. Okay? And we did the same thing for all these others. System downtime. You'll see that some of these are very close to each other. That's a coincidence. Estimated costs, and so forth. So we've got all these things kind of stacked up next to each other, and we can see that there's various values for each of these. I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. On the right-hand side, we do totals, 3-year and 5-year, and then we give an estimate for what's the combined effect of delivering all 4 of these projects, high, low, and expected boost to this. And you can see, I mean, the question is this going to be compelling for a, it's certainly written in a way that a financial person can look at it pretty quickly and grasp it and say, well, look, if we're a $100 million revenue company, to invest whatever these numbers are that we need to invest, total project cost plus maintenance cost, is it worth this investment to get this return out? Even on the low side, the answer probably should be yes. So that was kind of a medium-sized one. I don't want to take you through a really detailed one, but that's the sort of level that I find that most people will find reasonably compelling, and it's reasonably simple, so that you can trace everything back to saying, okay, we're acquiring extra customers, or we're increasing the retention, or both of those things, or we're reducing expenses. That's fine. Okay. Questions on what I've just presented? Okay. You can see it takes some time to put together things like this, but I find that it's well worth the time. The time that it takes to show sort of what the value is of actually doing these things can really be helpful. Now, I'm not sure why, but this didn't make it into your template directory. I'm not in love with this template. That's probably why. But I do have an Excel template that's given in the notes, that I have, and I'm happy to share it with you if you'd like it. Here's the template, and it has some header information, what some of the key solutions are, what our approach is, and it sort of has on the bottom the benefits and the costs. So there's a revenue improvement, there's an expense impact, there's a loss and risk mitigation. We also have in here customer supplier impact and capability enablement. This might be if you're training the workforce, there can be some other advantages to that. Here's a filled out example that happens to be for a life insurance company that I will keep in here because it's scrubbed enough. But it's essentially reducing cycle time and improving satisfaction for sales agents. and decreasing some errors. You can see on the right-hand side we have some risks and how we're going to mitigate those risks. Revenue impact, they didn't think there was any, so we left it that way. Expense impact, this is just an estimate, right? So you have to work all those estimates and get it to be more real, and all those things that are in here. Okay, and it rolls into this, and you can change your 14% or 12% or whatever. Okay, and you would put in the project costs into this after kind of vetting it down in the bottom. So that's basically what I wanted to talk to you about with business cases. Hopefully you found this was helpful. I find that this is one thing that in a lot of Six Sigma lean projects is neglected. So do take some time. To do this, and I think it will really repay your efforts. Now I see that we're at the top of the hour, 1 o'clock. So I am going to leave you with, you already have it as your reading assignment to read through this stuff. Scoping, I'd like you to read it through. There's only a few slides in there and a couple of examples. I think that the only thing that may provide you with some difficulty is if you haven't seen a Pareto analysis. This is a Pareto chart. A Pareto chart is just an ordered bar chart. So it tells you sort of what's the biggest bang for your buck. Okay, that's that. And this thing, which looks pretty complicated, but really what it is it's a SciPoc turned on its side with defects measurements and time measurements on the top. And a time value diagram which just says the wider ones take the longest time, the shorter ones take a little side. Where there's white space, that's delay. That's a time value diagram. So I think everything else should be very, very straightforward in there. And last thing last, we can talk about this very shortly next time, but I'd like you to take a stab at putting together your Gantt chart. The work breakdown structure, we actually did go over an example, which was the IT estimation. That's exactly a work breakdown structure for a product or for a project. You break down all the activities into reasonable chunks, and then you can estimate how long they're going to take. That's it. The Gantt chart then is a picture of, I'm going to show you that. The Gantt chart then is a picture of how all those things are going to happen. Put on top of it, you put a timeline on that, so that a final Gantt looks somewhat like this. You know which activities happen when, and you know which ones have been completed. Love pictures if you can do this. Last thing I want to comment on is in your exercises. In your exercises on the last one, I've included a Gantt chart. If you'd like to, go ahead and use this. You can just fill in the blanks on this. If you don't want to use this, you can use your own. But that's all. Okay. If you do that, just attach it, and we'll be golden. Okay. I'll kind of end this by saying by giving you the floor. If you have any questions whatsoever, whoops, just kind of put this back on where we were. If you have any questions whatsoever, I'll stay on the line until all of you are off, or I've answered any of your questions. Happy to talk more, but I want to be respectful of your time. You can always call me. You know my number. And thanks for all turning in your homework assignments. I do appreciate that. Okay. Have a great weekend, guys, and we'll see you on next Tuesday, and we'll be all set for that. Have a great weekend, and remember to call me if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Hey, Mark, looking at our schedule next week, we have mandatory PTO on Friday.